Hello, and welcome to Anything But Ordinary with Spooky and Raven. Tonight's topic is the Sodder Family mystery. I am your host, Spooky, and here is your other most awesome host, Raven.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I was like, when are you gonna talk? I just cut the music.
I was counting to five. I'm a slow counter.
Yeah, I'm like, oh my gosh, hurry up. We have dead air. I'm doing good. I guess I just have a little, we're all joking a little bit before the show, so I still kind of have my giggles going on because, you and Penny were cracking me up a little bit before we came on.
I think it was mostly Penny. She's nuts.
Did you say what we were doing tonight? Because I don't even know.
Yeah, tonight's topic is the Sodder Family mystery.
Okay, we were talking really fast, so I'm like, did she even say it? But yeah, I picked this topic
Yep,
tonight
you did.
because I just thought it was extremely fascinating, and I've seen it in so many different documentaries and read about so many different things, and I don't know, it's just something that if you haven't heard of it, it's definitely worth kind of looking into. It's just something I always found really fascinating. But, the Sodder case mysteries.
Believe it or not, this is one case I had never heard of. And I know a lot of things because I read a lot, but I had
Yeah.
never heard of this case. And the more that I read into it, the more fascinating I thought it was.
Somebody's saying my mic is a little low, so let me go and check the levels here. Sometimes things like to change themselves on us, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
Okay, hopefully that'll be better. If you guys can hear it, and somebody in chat just kind of type and let us know. Hopefully I got it louder for your ears. But like I was saying, to me the Sodder case mystery, it's always been very intriguing, and as far as I know, no one really knows for sure, the fate of these children and what truly happened that night. And irregardless, it can be like a parent's worst nightmare,
Oh,
when they
yeah.
suddenly realize that their child's missing. But I mean, because it can, I don't know, basically it can happen anywhere, anytime, to anyone. And for but this was like 5 children, or a few of them, but this was like George and Jenny Sodder, and to them it was just horrific.
Well, every day we hear about another child who's disappeared, but not 8 kids in one family, you know, who all turn up missing all on the same night. Or at least I haven't heard of any case like this.
Nor I mean, not one to be as mysterious as this one seems to be.
True. And I read somewhere that they say about every 40 seconds a child goes missing. Now, that's over 800,000 kids who go missing every year in the United States alone. But a lot of these missing cases tend to be solved at some point through accidents, foul play, taken by a parent, or people who just, want to start over. But
Right.
you come across cold cases like the Sodder family case, and there really is no rhyme or reason or any evidence to give you a direction or to go
A
or a
pinpoint.
pinpoint. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. I couldn't get it out.
Well, that's true, because when we were kind of digging around and trying to do research and really try to find out more than just what the basic websites were saying, and
Right.
we really do try to get as much as we can out there, more than what we've seen or hear or whatever. But I mean, this one, like I said, there's just so many things, and then there's so many things that throw you off, and what certain people were doing was kind of shady, and why were these people doing this. We're kind of explaining it all and go into talking a little bit about everything. But I mean, we're not here to make you guys believe one way or the other. We're just kind of lay everything out on the table, and then kind of let you guys decide what you kind of think what truly happened. But I know I'm kind of leaning towards one way myself. But I don't know, I think for this case, I think it's been like over 70 years have passed,
Right.
and like I said, no one's any closer at solving this bizarre, to me, I think, the disappearance and the fate of these missing children. And this case fascinated me, like I told you when I first came across it eons ago, because we've discussed it many times before we actually do shows, because we're always bantering about this stuff. But
Right.
I don't know, I really think it needs more circulation, because it's just something that I think should be brought about. It's one of those cold cases that I just think needs more airtime and stuff. But, the youngest sibling, they're still alive today, and they're still wondering what happened to their brothers and sisters. And they, too, believe that, something was more foul and sinister that took play.
Right, and technically, this is still, even though it's in the cold case file, it's still technically an open case. I think we should start off first by telling of that night's events and proceed into giving some background and known details and discrepancies to our thoughts and theories.
Yeah, okay, I agree. I'll start it off. The beginning part of kind of like giving the story of it and stuff like that.
Right.
But,
What?
oh, go ahead. What?
No, go ahead and give background on this. Let our listeners know what the story is.
Yeah, and then we'll kind of go into different theories and opinions and thoughts. But I lost my spot. What was the town again? I forgot.
Fayetteville,
Yeah,
West Virginia.
In United States on December 24th of 1945 on Christmas Eve, the Sodder family were celebrating the holidays. Now, George and Jenny Sodder had 10 children, 9 of which were still at home at the time. Now, Joe, being the oldest, was away serving in the military. That's why there was only 9 at home at the time when this event started to occur. Now, from what I kind of gathered from reading on the net and stuff, like I said, I was trying to dig around to find what was the main story for everybody and stuff. But from what I was gathering, it was basically, December 24th. It was becoming late in the evening, and I think somewhere around, which most of the sites were saying was about 10 p.m., when Jenny was trying to gather, the younger children to kind of go to bed. But, it's Christmas Eve. They were kind of excited.
Right.
And they just got these new toys from their older sister, Marion, who had, at the time, she was 17, and she was working at the local dime store, and she purchased her younger siblings these gifts. So, of course, they want to stay up and play with these toys and stuff like every kid does, So they kind of were begging their mom at that time. They're like, oh, can we stay up and play a little longer? And George and the 2 oldest sons, George being the dad, and the 2 older sons, John 23 and George Jr. 16, they had already, head up and went to bed earlier in the evening because they had worked all day with their father's business. So it was saying that Jenny decided that it was fine on a certain condition. She told them that if they all finished up their chores, and as long as the 2 older boys were still up to watch over them too, the 2 other older boys, because at the time the youngest was Sylvia. She was 2, and she was going to go up to bed with Jenny at the time. So this would leave Maurice, who was 14, Martha, who was 12, Louis, who was 9, Jenny, who was 8, and Betty, who were 5. They were going to be all the ones who were just going to stay up a little later because Martha and Maurice was going to kind of watch over them because they were 14 and 12. They're in the house just
Right.
playing. It's 10 o'clock. She figured another hour or whatever, and then they just head up. But she specifically told them that she wanted to make sure they finished up their chores because they still had, the oldest kids had to feed the cows and, basically put the chickens in for the evening and what have you, while the younger ones would play in the house with their toys and stuff. Well, I guess, according to these sites that I was reading, sometime around 12 a.m. to 12:30 a.m., the telephone rang and woke Jenny up. So, of course, she went to go answer it, and there was like this woman whose voice she said she didn't recognize, was asking for a name for somebody who did not live in the house, nor did she even know who this person was that she was asking for. And then she could hear like clinking of glasses in the background and, a little loud noise and stuff. And then the woman just started laughing, and then she hung up after, Jenny told him, well, you have the wrong number. So Jenny was just like, okay, whatever. So she just went upstairs and returned to bed. Well, as the evening grew on, before she went up, she had noticed on her way up that the lights were still on, the curtains were not closed, which were 2 things a children's normal chore would do before they went up to bed if they stayed up later than their parents. And then she saw the oldest daughter, Maria, who was already sleeping on the couch. So she just assumed that all the other children who had stayed up a little bit later had gone up to the attic and they went to sleep. So she went and closed the curtains, turned out the lights, and returned to bed. Now, there was a couple sites saying that she also noticed the door was unlocked. so she locked it as well. So that was on some sites I was reading, but not all of
Yeah.
them. So, but I guess sometime maybe like 30 minutes later or whatever, after she fell back asleep, she was awoken again by some large object hitting the roof with like this huge large thud, and then it started sounding like it was just rolling down the roof. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So she was kind of listening for a bit, like, what the blank is that? So she went, after a while, she didn't hear anything else, so she was like, okay, I'm just going to go back to sleep. And then after a while, this is where different websites have a little variation, but they say about 30 minutes or so after, that's when she woke to the smell of smoke. Well, getting up, of course, she went out into the hallway, and when she opened the door to George's office, which was near their bedroom, that's when she noticed it was on fire. And the telephone was also in that room. Another telephone was in that room too, according to some newspaper clippings and
Yeah.
whatever. But of course, she's panicked. She started yelling for her husband George to wake up, and then Marina, who's the eldest daughter,
Marion.
Marion, well, she was the one down. She came running up. She grabbed Sylvia, the 2-year-old that was sleeping with Jenny and George, and she ran outside with the 2-year-old. And George, he bolted, basically barefoot. He ran outside with a bucket to fill it up with water from the rain barrel. And, Jenny, she ran to the bottom of the attic stairs, and she was screaming for the rest of her children, to hurry up and come down or whatever. And that's when John and George Jr., the 2 oldest sons that I was talking about, who went to bed earlier than all the rest of the kids, they came racing down, and they'd already had been partly singed by flames and stuff. And so they came running down and barreling outside, and Jenny ran outside. And when George was outside at the time, like I told you, he ran out barefoot with a couple buckets, whatever, to get water from the rain barrel. He found out that the water was basically a block of solid ice, so they couldn't do anything with it. And in kind of like all the excitement and confusion of everything that was kind of going on, that's when George realized that not all of his children had made it outside, because all he saw was his wife and the 4 kids, which was John, George Jr., Sylvia, and Marion. So, of course, they all started panicking, and they're turning around and, looking around for them, and they're yelling for them. They're frantically screaming for the rest of the kids to come out and stuff. And nobody heard any response. I mean, there was nothing. So, of course, George tried to reach them, but when he ran back inside, the staircase was kind of already engulfed in flames by now. So he ran outside and ran to a window, and he smashed it to try to re-enter the house. And when he popped in, he was in one of the other rooms, and it was so smoke-filled, he could barely make his way through, and he just couldn't find the kids. He was feeling around for anybody in the bottom area or whatever, and he couldn't find anybody. So he kind of figured that Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty must be upstairs, cowering either in one of the 2 bedrooms on each side of the hallway. But due to like I was saying, the staircase being engulfed in flames and the intense heat that was burning, George had to basically make his way back outside through the window, and he was kind of frantically running around outside trying to think of how can I get to my kids and stuff. So he tried to kind of scale the house wall on the outside to try to get to the upstairs windows, but every time he kept trying to race for it or climb up, he just kept sliding back down. So he remembered, this is what he's saying at the time, but there was like this ladder that they normally have propped up against the house in the backside. So he went back there to go grab for the ladder, but he discovered that the ladder was not there, and it was nowhere in the vicinity. So, he's freaking out. He's thinking his kids are upstairs burning or, dying from smoke inhalation and stuff. So him and the older kids decided to jump in both of his coal trucks. He had these 2 huge coal trucks, so they were going to back him up to the side of the house, jump on top, and break into the windows and get the kids out, right? Well, when George and the other son got into either truck, they weren't working. They wouldn't fire up or anything, and they were just using them earlier that day at work. So there's no reason why these trucks shouldn't be operational either. So at this time, George and his wife noticed that his arm was like bleeding profusely because he had this open gash and stuff when he was bashing in through the lower window and stuff. But I think when they were trying to get the trucks going and everything else and trying to get upstairs and they couldn't do it or whatever, the eldest daughter they told you who ran out with Sylvia, the youngest one, well, she
Right.
raced over to the neighbors to have them call the fire department.
Well, it sounds like he did everything he could to get to his children.
Well, they all were. They were screaming. They were trying to go in any way that they could get it through past the fire to try to get to them. And they thought that they were up there, but they weren't responding to them. There was no noise, no nothing, you know?
Yeah. Well, I found this one site that had a letter that she wrote to explain what she had done, and we'll post a link to that site so the listeners can go read it for themselves as well.
Right.
But her letter read that she ran over to the neighbor's house to call the fire department, like you mentioned, but the neighbor told her that operator didn't answer, and when she tried to call, that the operator didn't answer when she tried to call the fire department. I'm getting a little tongue-tied here. I apologize.
Yeah.
And so a passing motorist called the Fayetteville Fire Department, which was really close to their residence. And the fire chief, F.J. Morris, and was told that the Sodder house was on fire, and he said, "We know it." Now that was at 2:00, and he and the rest of the fire department didn't arrive until 8:00 in the morning.
Right. They
Now
were called. They at that time it was 2:00 a.m. in the morning, and
Right.
they didn't get there till 8:00 in the morning. That's a
Right.
huge gap.
Yeah, it is. And the thing of it was, though, when she called, when Marion called the fire department, or this passing motorist called, and reported that the Sodder house was on fire, he answered, "We know it." Now, she stated in her letter that the fire department was only 2.5 miles away from their home.
Right. Which we're going to kind of talk, it's more because there's a lot of things in telling the story where things don't add up and things being moved or things not working. Like I said, the two trucks weren't working, which they were just working perfectly the earlier in that day when they were working. The ladder that's always in the one spot behind the house is missing. And the fire department's like, "Oh, yeah, we know," but they take, what?
Yeah, and it takes them 6 hours to
hours to
drive
get there.
2.5 miles.
Well, see, they tried to use their phone at first to call, but they found it was dead. So at some point after she received that phone call and then went back to bed, 30 minutes or 40 minutes later, their telephone wasn't working. And then, of course, they had to
Right.
race out, because of the fire getting spread everywhere or whatever. But, like I said, the eldest, they ran to the next house. And when they were at the neighbors and stuff, they were having trouble getting a hold of anyone.
Right.
And, they kept calling and trying and everything, and nobody was answering. The operator wasn't answering. A bunch of people weren't even answering. So at one point, this motorist got a hold of the fire department because somebody was going by, and then they're like, "Okay, we'll go get help," But all the Sodders could do was sit and watch their house burn to the ground. I mean, at this point, they're only assuming that their other 5 children were trapped inside. And from the reports and everything that I was reading, it was said that it only took about 45 minutes for it to burn. And by that time, the department showed up. The fire was already burnt out for a couple hours before they even showed, because like you said, they didn't show up till 8:00. Now, the funny thing is, from what I was reading, they said that they had tried several phones. The motorists who went to town, they tried different phones that they had stopped by, and none of them were working. They couldn't get a hold of the operator, or the phones were broken, or whatever. So it was like all this weird stuff that kept happening.
Yeah, now back then, you didn't dial a number direct. All your phone calls went through an operator who actually dialed them for you.
Right. But the thing is, the motorist, he stopped at a tavern, the telephone didn't work, he stopped at another place, and the operator wasn't answering, and usually there used to be more than one operator doing different shifts or whatever.
Right.
But the thing is, so he finally, he got to this one place, I can't remember, it was another phone, like in the middle of the center of town or something, and that's finally when they were successful. But it was stated on some sites that I was reading that Chief Morris said the reason, because you were mentioning that they took so long to get there and stuff like that. And what I was reading on a couple of the sites, Chief Morse, who was in charge, said the reason why they were so slow to respond was because he didn't know how to drive the fire truck. I mean, that's awful.
I'm sorry. He's a fire chief and he don't know how to drive the fire truck.
I know. And so he was like, so he said, well, I didn't know how to drive that fire truck with the hook and ladder and stuff. So he said he had to wait until somebody who knew how to do it arrived, and that it took them a long time because each person had to ring up the other to arrive. So it was their excuse. That was their excuse, from 1 a.m. to 8 a.m. That's like, what, 7 hours too long, And
isn't it funny though how the phones were working then?
And then all of a sudden,
because he was calling people to come in.
I know, but there's too many things that are adding up that are kind of fishy. Do you see what I'm trying to say? And we're going to point out this a little bit more, but like I was saying, it took them 7 hours to get there. By that time, the fire's already been burnt out. It took 45 minutes for their house to burn down, and it just seems a little fishy that the chief doesn't even know how to operate their own vehicles. But it was said on some sites that George and Jenny searched through the grounds of ash and ruins of their own house for any trace of the remains. And then, but this was before even the firefighters got there. And then the firefighters joined in along with them. And then at some point, Chief Morris had just suggested, well, the fire was so intense that it completely cremated the bodies. And he said this around about 10 a.m. So 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., that's when he decided, that wasn't a really whole lot of searching to do,
No, it wasn't.
Professional type of searching. And a lot of people who are professionals who have read this and looked into the documents and stuff say that they did a really poor job of it at best, too. But he just decided to claim that the fire was so intense that the bodies were cremated. Now, they found nothing in the basement of any, flesh or bones. But they didn't really do, I'm saying, a thorough search because it was Christmas time. So what happened is everybody decided, okay, we looked a little bit, the fire's out, we're going to postpone this, and then we're all going to go celebrate Christmas with our family, and then we'll come back and help you, is what happened.
Well, in her letter...
That's kind of...
I know, that's... This family was having a tragedy. The fact that their house burnt down is a tragedy.
Yeah.
And the fact that it happened on Christmas
Eve.
Christmas Eve. And these people thought, well, the house is already burnt down. We'll just wait, have our Christmas dinner, and then we'll go out there and have a look-see.
Yeah. Sorry, you can just hold on your emotions while we go celebrate with our family.
Just, hey, your kids may be missing, but hey, just hang on. Our kids...
Our family, I need to eat.
I need to eat. Our kids are here and all alive. Why ruin our day? In her letter, Marion said that the fire chief said that they went over it all with a fine-tooth comb and found nothing. But he came around a few days later showing the family a piece of flesh saying it was human remains. Now, she said that her and her family were puzzled because this flesh was soft and it survived the fire, but no trace of bone or teeth did, which is unusual.
Yeah, because that flesh had no burning or nothing to it. It was
even if the bodies had been cremated, there would still be bone. She also stated in her letter that another thing that stopped them was that there was no scent of burning flesh during the 45 minutes that it took the house to burn. If you've ever smelt burning flesh, you never forget that smell.
Oh, yeah. There's some of us who even caught on fire when we're by a campfire and stuff, and it's, you smell singed hair. It stays in your nose for a while. It doesn't go away. But the thing... Like you said, it took, 45 minutes it took the house to burn down? But the thing is that during that time, they heard absolutely no screams or cries for help or anything. And everybody else, the two older brothers were supposedly staying in the same room with the other kids. And they just assumed that everybody was running down with them. They went out. Obviously, none of these people, the smoke wasn't that intense to make anybody have, smoke...
Inhalation?
Yeah, you know what I mean?
And there was no there was no smell of burnt flesh in the ashy remains either. And
Yeah.
she stated in this letter that all they could smell was the scent of burning wood. That there were so many things not really adding up.
Yeah, and I read that letter too, and this was the oldest one, who at the time was, she was like what, 14? No, 17. She was the one
Yeah.
sleeping on the couch or whatever. But it's a pretty. We're gonna share the link to the letter so you guys can all read it too and stuff, and share all the links to the references where we got stuff. But basically, this Chief Morse claimed to have found this fleshy piece in the soil that George had previously pushed on top of the remains of the structure, because George decided 4 days after the incident that he and his wife couldn't bear the sight of this burnt remains, of the structure anymore. So they decided to bulldoze like 5 feet of dirt over it to kind of make it into like a memorial for their children, to plant flowers and everything on it, because as far as they were told, they were just burnt up into ash. Okay.
Right.
So they just thought they lost everything, and they were just grieving, and just they couldn't stand looking at it. It was just making everything worse for them. So that's why he put 5 feet of dirt over it. And it was after that point, that this guy went and supposedly found this fleshy piece of stuff
In the soil.
that he just pushed there. But they were told by people that it was faulty wiring that set this house on fire. But the thing is, it wasn't long after, once the shock kind of started to wear off of the family, is when they started to question all of the official findings about this fire and the night's events and how everything started to play out, And at this one point, George actually had new electrical wire installed when they put in a new stove. So it wasn't old faulty wiring that could cause the fire. And in this one newspaper article that I was reading, it said that they later, the chief of the fire department chief and other people who had written a statement claiming that it was a faulty wire, they actually recanted that statement and later down the road. So it wasn't faulty wiring that
Well,
caused the fire.
he can't drive a fire truck. What makes anybody think he can investigate an arson or any kind of
or
fire?
natural wire fire or whatever,
Right.
yeah.
In her letter, she even mentions that they doubted and had suspicions of the chief and the fire. They didn't understand how it is that the chief knew just where to find the piece of unburnt flesh and why he never showed it to the coroner. The family,
See?
that made the family
There's
decide.
so many things that are like, what,
The family decided to take this piece of flesh to the local mortician and had him swear on an affidavit that this object was a large piece of beef liver and had never been touched by any fire.
Yeah, and to have him swear on an affidavit is pretty serious.
Yeah, it is.
But, so here's the thing, right? I know we're going to kind of jump around a bit now with this story and the oddness of it, so we're all going to, so everybody listening, kind of bear with us because we do this a lot. We kind of jump around, but we always bring it in, but
Right.
they had the funeral, from what I was reading, on January 2nd of 1946. Now, what I was reading, both Jenny and George, they didn't attend this because they were like really messed up with grief. So the only people who really attended was the eldest children during that time. And, they didn't go because they couldn't deal with that, the loss and everything that they were going through. And then now to have all this suspicious thoughts towards what everybody was saying and the weird acts that the chief was doing and everything else. But during this time, everyone started to kind of retrace over all that occurred, and they started questioning everything. And it was said that not long after the family found that ladder that I was talking about earlier,
Yeah.
that they usually have propped up against the house, they found it tossed in an embankment 75 feet away. Why was the ladder tossed in an embankment 75 feet away? That
Right.
makes you wonder. They also questioned about the faulty wiring and what could have caused the fire when all the lights were still working and the Christmas lights were still on for the first part of the fire.
Right.
Plus, it was all new wiring, like I told you. Now, they also had a telephone repairman mention to the family that their house line had not been burned, but it was actually cut.
There you go.
He said that somebody climbed up the 14-foot pole. They had to reach over 2 feet, and they actually cut the wire. The wire was cut. It was not burned. That's the reason why their phone wasn't working. They also didn't believe that the children were cremated by the fire because many of the household appliances had still been recognizable. And fragments of the tin roof was still existing, So if it was that hot, you wouldn't have these household appliances and other stuff still there.
Right. And Jenny also saw in a newspaper that a similar fire, I think it was a 3-story house, burned to the ground and killed a family of 7. And this family of 7, their skeletal remains were all found.
Yeah, because at this point, like I was saying, they were like, none of this is adding up, And,
Right.
and they're really doing at this point, they're doing their own investigation. But she even tried her own experiments with burning piles of animal bones in her own wood burner stove, just to see if she could completely consume them, and really stoked it up as much as she could. And none of them were ever completely gone. I mean, they were just charred. They
Right.
weren't cremated into powder or whatever you want to call it. And they even, Jenny and George, they even spoke to like this local, what do they call them, crematorium? They
Yeah,
went to like
crematorium.
a local crematorium place, and they were talking to somebody who worked there, and they told Jenny that human bones remain even after bodies are burned at 2,000 degrees for 2 hours, which is far longer and hotter than what the house fire could have been at their place, because it only burned for 45 minutes.
Right. When someone is cremated, the flesh and their organs and all of that are burned, but their bones remain. And when you get an urn of your loved one, what you're actually getting are pulverized bone. That's what you're getting. And not just that, what about both George's coal trucks?
Yeah.
They were working perfectly fine early before the fire, and George himself believed they were tampered with. And also, there was a man that neighbors had seen stealing a block and tackle from Sodder's property around the same time of the fire, and he was arrested. And supposedly, this man admitted to the theft and claimed he had been the one who cut the phone line, thinking it was the power line. But he also claimed that he had nothing to do with the fire. But from the Otis sisters' letter, they called and asked the prosecuting attorney to call in some people who were considered suspects in this case.
Mm-hmm.
And he told them he couldn't question these people because they were personal friends of his.
Yeah.
And that he said that today they burned your house, but tomorrow they may burn mine, and I have children too.
That's exactly why people didn't want to help them. Because
Right.
there was, like we said, we're going to go more into this, but there's people who feared for themselves too.
Yeah. Well, she said that the wires were cut during the fire. The person who cut them had stolen during that time. The house was burning, which was a pair of chain blocks that Sodder used to hoist motors out of vehicles for repairs and such.
Right.
And that these were attached to their garage ceiling, and this person had to start the process sometime before or during the fire, and that he had a taxi cab that they stole waiting to haul them away.
Yeah.
Now, they think that this person may have either set the fire or knew someone else was supposed to do so, and that he never did show up in court. So,
But they find him.
But they fined him a small amount of money, and he was basically let go with no other questioning.
See? What's up with that? All these things are adding up that are really weird. Why was this guy, he climbs the pole, he cuts the telephone wire, and then he's there at the time.
And all of this he has to do, and all of this is done during the fire.
Yeah.
And these people are grieving so much and running around so much to get their children out of their house because they think that they have children in there who are dying in this fire, that they don't even notice this guy.
Right. And, well, of course, they're not going to notice the guy, but the guy's out back stealing really heavy, I don't know, what do you call it?
Heavy equipment.
It's heavy equipment to lift out engines, a block and tackle. That's a pretty big thing. You have to get the chains off of these huge rafters, and then the fact that he has a spare, he had a car waiting right there too around there.
Right, he had to be in that garage a long time to get those.
Right, but I read on some sites that this bus driver was passing through the what the heck was the name of town again?
Fayetteville
on Christmas Eve, and he said that he noticed some people throwing balls of fire at George and Jenny's house. Now, Jenny's youngest, Sylvia, like I said, a few months later, she was kind of playing around in the area or whatever. It's kind of like springtime by that time, so all the snow was melted and stuff. So she was kind of playing around in the ash and what have you. And she actually found, according to these places I was reading, she found like this small, kind of like this hard, dark green rubber object. And it kind of had like this hollow, it was kind of like hollow inside, and it had like this twist off type of cap. Now she found it in the nearby brush near where the house had burned down, you know what I mean? Right. And the Sodders were told that it was actually a pineapple bomb, and they were told by some army authorities because they brought it in trying to figure out what this thing was. Okay. Right. Now this army man told them that this pineapple bomb was like this incendiary type of hand grenade used in combat. Well, George told Jenny that was what she heard hitting the roof and rolling down that night. Now, both George and Jenny never once believed the faulty wiring that caused the fire, which was later on recanted, like I told you. Right. But they said that the fire had started on the roof, and they kept trying to tell everybody that, but everybody's like, no. Obviously, this chief dude is in part of something, obviously, with all these different shady things and stuff that he was doing, but they couldn't officially prove this at the time,
Right.
Or so it was said anyway. But they had other witnesses claim to have seen the children too at this time during the fire, because first you have a bus driver who's driving by and sees two people standing outside a house whipping fireballs, right? You have this other woman who's driving by, and she claims that she saw where, she was driving by when she said that she seen this car well, she was kind of watching, she stopped, she was watching the fire, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And she was kind of looking around, seeing everything that's going on, and then she saw this car passing, and she said that she seen some of the kids peering out of this passing car while the house was burning. Now, there was another woman at a rest stop between Fayetteville and Charleston, and she said that she had served them breakfast the next morning, and said that there was like this strange car with a Florida license plates in the rest stop parking lot as well. So there's two other people claiming that they seen the kids alive, and they weren't in the house, but they were strangers.
There were also reports of the children being seen at a hotel. In the older sister's letter, she said the night of the fire she fell asleep downstairs, and the last time she saw her siblings, they were still playing. Mm-hmm. And that she believes in her heart the kids were taken sometime during or before the fire started. Mm-hmm. But in her letter, she talks about the kids being seen. Mrs. Ida Crutchfield from Charleston, West Virginia, who was an owner of the Alderson Hotel, and she told people that she had seen 4 of the children at her hotel 3 or 4 nights after the fire. And that, excuse me, mm-hmm. that the children were accompanied by 2 women and 2 men, all of Italian extraction, she said in her statement.
Mm-hmm.
How do you extract Italian?
I don't know. It's just
Anyway,
this
anyway,
just was in the statements and stuff of the reports. So
she said in her statement that she says, I do not remember the exact date. However, the entire party did register at the hotel and stayed in a large room with several beds. They registered about midnight. Um, she tried to talk to the family in a friendly manner, but the man appeared hostile and refused to allow her to talk to these children. One of the men looked at her in a hostile manner, and he turned around and he began talking rapidly in Italian.
mm-hmm.
And immediately the whole party stopped talking to her, completely. And she said that she sensed that she was being frozen out, and so she said nothing more to them. And they left early the next morning. She even signed an affidavit.
Right. A lot of these people, it wasn't that long after that they were bringing these reports and statements up. So, but I know we're kind of jumping around a bit, guys. And I'm sorry, but there's kind of a lot that we're throwing out there. But, before, like I was saying, before the fire started, there was some strange events that seemed to take place with some of the family members from what I was reading, and also from the eldest daughter's letter. And it wasn't until after the fire, however, is kind of like when they started to piece all these things together, like a big puzzle. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, we should talk a bit on the parents' background, too.
Oh, yeah, I agree. We didn't even say where they came from or what,
Well,
whatever.
George Sodder was born Giorgio Sadu in Tula, Sardinia in 1895, and he immigrated to the United States in 1908 when he was 13 years old with his older brother. And after they arrived to Ellis Island, George's older brother, for some reason, immediately returned to Italy, so he left George alone, at 13 years old in a strange country.
Mm-hmm.
And it was said on some sites that George ended up working on the Pennsylvania railroads, helping out the laborers by being their supply or water boy. And after a few years, he found himself in Smithers, West Virginia, and worked as a trucker, and eventually started his own trucking company, hauling dirt for construction companies and then later coal. Now, it was around that same time when he met Jenny at a local store called the Music Box, and it was owned by her parents. Now, Jenny Cipriani and her family came over from Italy when she was 3.
Mm-hmm.
So they were married in 1923. They had 10 kids, and they settled in Fayetteville, West Virginia, which is a small Appalachian town that had an active Italian immigrant community.
Mm-hmm.
Now, according to this site I was reading, it was said that George held strong opinions about everything from business to current events and politics, but was for some reason reticent to talk about his youth. And he never explained what had happened back in Italy to make him want to leave.
And why did his brother come with him and then quickly leave Ellis Island and hop right back on the boat? It was almost like they were getting rid of him or something. There's so many things that just sound weird.
That was my thought too. He traveled all that way, mm-hmm. got to Ellis Island, and then turned around. Hi, bye. You're on your own, 13 years old, and he hopped the next boat back to Italy,
right?
Or Sardinia.
There's a lot of things that just make me think about random mob connections and stuff, but like you said, they were living in a community that had a lot of the Italian immigrants that moved in, and they had very strong belief systems when it came to politics and stuff from the old country and everything else, and they were still supporting certain things, but kind of like I mentioned earlier, they were having some strange encounters with people prior to the fire accident, remember?
Yeah.
And now it was said that one day, like, this random stranger came to the house like a few months earlier, asking about hauling work because, like we said, George and his sons, ran this coal running business. You know what I'm saying? And they kind of, this guy was kind of acting weird because he's like hanging out there. He was just lingering
Right.
around the back of the house, looking around after he asked for George. And George like, yeah, I don't really have any need for you or whatever. But the guy was just kind of meandering about and just looking over all their stuff, looking at their house. Just kind of, it just seemed weird. And he at one point told George that, because he was pointing at these two separate fuse boxes at the back of the house, and he said, you know what, one day that's going to cause you a fire. And George was kind of puzzled by that comment because he just, like I said, had new wires put in, and it was checked by the local power company when they had the new stove put into the house. So everything was basically up to par. So why would this man who come looking for a job come out and point specifically and say, oh, well, those two fuse boxes are going to cause a fire and it's just going to go up, So he was like, okay, that's weird. And it was also said that another man appeared one day trying to sell the family life insurance. Well, of course, George declined, and then that really set this man off. I mean, he got really pissed, okay? And he started yelling at George saying, I don't want to say this, but this is exactly what he said. Your goddamn house is going to go up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed and you're going to pay for all the dirty remarks you've been making about Mussolini. And then he left. Now, one, that's not how you sell life insurance, okay? Just because
you wouldn't sell it to me like that.
No. Oh, well, thanks for, screaming at me.
Matter of
I'll
fact,
just sign up, But the fact is that
that person would be leaving there with that insurance policy somewhere up their body that they don't want it.
Where the sun don't shine.
That's right.
Exactly. But the point is, okay, here we got this random stranger claiming to be looking for a job, and he's like, oh, your fuse boxes are going to set on fire. Then you have this other guy who's pushing life insurance, and then he's screaming at them saying, your house is going to go up in smoke, your children are going to be destroyed, and to basically shut your mouth when it comes to talking about Mussolini. Now, some of the kids also said that they had told they had weird noticings too. Now, they talked about this strange man who was parked out on US Highway 21 that had been watching the kids for a while when they kept coming home and going to school for a few days.
Well, many sites did say that George didn't keep his mouth shut when it came to his dislike for Mussolini. Politics and such, and I am sure it upset many in the area who had really strong likings and agreements with Mussolini.
Well, right, and
that for a while there, even though he was a butcher and basically a douchebag,
I don't
there
know
were
if
some
anybody's
people
called
who actually
Mussolini a
liked him.
douchebag, So
Well, there were some people who actually did like him.
I know, I've just never heard anybody call Mussolini a douchebag. But, it's not too many of the...
He starved his people. I mean, he
I know, I'm
caused
not saying he
people
was a
in the
good man,
Ukraine to resort to cannibalism.
Oh, no, I know. I wasn't saying that he wasn't a jerk. I just never heard anybody call Mussolini a douchebag. So it just made
he was a douchebag.
Oh, I know. It just made me laugh a little. But I read on some sites that in 1947 that they even wrote a letter to...
Can you even say douchebag on never mind.
Anyway, I read on a couple sites and stuff and some of the statements and stuff that they even wrote a letter to J. Edgar Hoover to get the FBI involved.
There's another one.
And that they agreed to assist them, but they didn't get permission from the local authorities.
The FBI don't have to get permission. They're the federal government. They outrank the local authorities.
But to a certain degree, but you have to get, a certain permission to say, do you need our services? To agree, to say, yeah, we need your help or whatever.
Well, in the oldest daughter's letter, she talked about that too, and she said that they did ask the FBI for help, and they did agree to step in if they could get permission from the county authorities to investigate the case, and that the local authorities refused to sign anything giving permission every time. So she said that they had written to each president since Hoover And each time it was referred to the FBI, then the Federal Bureau requires the permission of local authorities who kept refusing permission every time. And she claimed that it was an endless cycle for her family and leaving it to become a cold case.
Mm-hmm.
Now, according to her letter, she even mentioned how the local authorities certainly did not do anything themselves to solve this crime. And so why would they refuse help from the FBI? She even questioned, was it because some of them may be involved in this crime? And it was at this point her family got frustrated and hired private detectives to help solve this. You know what?
Here we go.
I never in
So
my
fired
life
up. You know
heard that the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, ever had to get permission from local authorities. They usually step in, say, hi, I'm from the FBI, you're fired, we're in charge.
Well, but there's certain cases where if they contact the local authorities and stuff and say, hey, do you need our assistance or whatever, and if they tell them, no, we got this covered, whatever they said to them was what was being said,
Well, technically,
who knows? Maybe they were informed of.
Well, technically, if you really stop and
why.
think about it, technically, with all that was going on, without proof, this technically was not a case for the FBI.
Right.
Because the family only had suspicions, they didn't have proof.
But they started getting, they had all this other stuff, but like I said, we're going to talk a little bit. Why don't we take like a 3-minute break, and then we'll come back and then finish the second half of our show. So for those of you who are listening, if you guys want to, go get a drink, get a snack, have a cigarette or whatever, we'll be back in 3 minutes to finish the rest of our story. And I don't know. Thanks for coming. Stay with us and please share us with others, and we'll be right back. welcome back to Anything But Ordinary. I'm your host, Raven, and hopefully Spooky's come back.
Yeah, I'm here.
Woohoo! I'm just going to click on. Going to pay a little tribute to our friend who passed on. You know, it's been a couple of years or whatever, but it happened to fall on his anniversary, so we're just gonna throw his picture up or whatever. But like I said, we're back and we're going to continue the second half of the Sodder Family mystery, whatever. And Spooky, do you remember what some of the last things you were just saying?
Well, I was talking about how Marion mentioned in her letter that she tried to get the FBI to help on this case, and they, of course, being the wussies that they are, had to ask for permission from the local authorities who refused to give it to them.
Yeah. It's just a lot of weird things that were occurring and stuff, you know. Just the fact of how he came over from Italy and his family ditched him at 13 and went back, that seems weird. You know, obviously he was very open speaking, coming to his beliefs and about the political stuff and everything else or whatever. And, you know, like we were talking about the fire and stuff, it was all odd and how people were claiming to have seen the kids and stuff, like whatever. But there was like these several different sites and stuff and newspaper clippings that they were saying that the Sodders had spent up to $15,000 from hiring those detectives that you were talking about. And a lot of it went for even just to traveling to different places, because a lot of people were claiming like, hey, I see your kid here. And they'd go to Mexico or, you know, New York, or they would be looking through some magazine or whatever and see somebody who they thought was one of their kids who had aged. And then
Well, yeah,
parents
every
would
time
raise it.
every time they got a clue or a lead, they had to follow it up.
Well,
And back then, of course, you know, you don't have the internet and all this other stuff you have nowadays. So they basically had to physically go and look.
right, but $15,000 is a lot back in the 40s and the 50s, you know. But they also made
Well, if
this
George
bill.
has got 10 kids, he can afford it.
Who?
George.
Well, just because you have a lot of kids doesn't mean you're rich.
Just kidding.
Anyway, they made this billboard, and they had it, you know, purchased in 1952, and it had it's basically had a black and white photographs of each of their missing children, and an account of the fire with a $5,000 reward for information leading to the recovery of any and or all of their children. And they
Right.
even had made flyers printed up with the pictures of the children, offering, you know, $5,000 on it as well. And then that was being circulated around. And it was said that they hired this guy. Supposedly his name was C.C. Tinsley. I'm not quite sure, but that's what a lot of the sites were saying. I know that the eldest daughter's letter did state that they did hire different detectives. I just don't think that
Right.
she mentioned a name. But anyway, this Tinsley guy discovered that the guy who was trying to sell the insurance to the Sodders and threatened George, you know, who was like, you know, screw you, your house is going up in flames and your children are going to die and you're going to pay for your remarks type of thing, that guy. Well, it turns out that this guy was actually a member of the coroner's jury that deemed the fire accidental. And he also
Oh,
found out
imagine that.
that F.J. Morris, the fire chief, placed the liver that you mentioned earlier about being human flesh on the site in order to stop further investigations being done. So he planted that liver there, telling them that it was one of their dead children's body parts so that they would stop digging around and trying to find out
Yeah, see
the
there,
truth.
the kids were cremated in the fire, but that liver survived. See,
But he said
Marion,
he said it was flesh though.
yeah,
Not
but
liver.
see, Marion mentioned that in her letter too about the detective finding evidence that points to it that it was all planned out, fire and all. and that these detectives were also warned by certain people to stop digging and to drop the case. And she said in her letter that even some state police admitted that their hands were tied. I even read on a few sites that in 1949 the Sodders brought a pathologist expert in from Washington, D.C. I think his name was Oscar B. Hunter, to excavate the site more thoroughly, and he did uncover several small items, damaged coins, a partly burned dictionary, a few shards of vertebrae, and Hunter sent the bones to the Smithsonian Institution, where they got back a report stating the human bones consist of 4 lumbar vertebrae belonging to one individual. The transfer recesses are fused, and the age of this individual at death should have been somewhere between 17 to 22 years old tops, since the centra, which normally fuses at the age of 23, was still unfused. Now, on this basis, the bones show greater maturity than one would expect to find, for a 14-year-old boy who was the oldest boy missing. And it also stated that these bones showed absolutely no evidence that they were exposed to a fire. And that it was very strange that no other bones were found in the evacuation of the basement of that house.
Right, when they were digging, searching, looking for evidence, right.
Right. And since the house only burned for 45 minutes, one would expect to find a full skeleton of all 5 children, not only 4 vertebrae. And they then concluded that it was more likely that the dirt that George used to fill in the basement for the memorial were from that and not from his children.
Right.
So evidently he found a pile of dirt that had human bones in it.
Right, or maybe somebody else dug somebody else's bones up and placed them there. Obviously, there's a bunch of shady stuff going on that doesn't make sense. Here they're planting liver, and why not plant a couple bones? Obviously,
sure, why not?
Something going on, because all of this is not adding up, like we're saying. But, I mean, the family did keep trying to have this case back on off the shelf and onto somebody's
reactivated.
Desk. Yeah, but each time they were denied. And even with the report from the Smithsonian. Now, both the governor and the state police told them that they needed to produce, air quotes here, evidence that their kids were murdered or kidnapped. If no evidence, they should just give up, and that they should just consider the case closed. Okay, what?
All of this, cut phone wire, a fire, a piece of liver, 4 vertebrae, truck's not working. This is not evidence that something is wrong. Ladder 75 feet from the house.
Right. Somebody who just came there a few days before, telling that their house was going to go up in flames, that their kids were going to disappear, and he should shut his mouth about Mussolini. They also, all the other things that they were saying was going on, but also a bus driver seen a couple people standing outside that house and whipping fireballs at it, and that guy swore on an affidavit. The people who noticed the kids wrote up on an affidavit saying that they saw the kids here and there and at the hotel and stuff like that. I mean, there's just so many things, and the fact that because of the detective, he actually got, like I told you, the Chief Morris, said, recanted about the faulty wire. He also stated that he planted the liver in the ground, too. They're all of this weird stuff. I mean, I'm not a police officer or a detective, but to me, it just would make me want to dig a little bit further. You know what I mean? Why would they just be like, oh, sorry, you need to stop bothering with
I know,
this,
and every turn they made, somebody was trying to stop the case, and I don't think George and Jenny never did drop it, did they?
Well, no, and I know a lot of this stuff is just circumstantial, you know what I mean?
Right.
But there's just so much stuff that's pointing that it proves that there's more to this than just a basic fire. If it was an electrical fire, what started it? They never did prove what, stated to what got it going. But, George and Jenny, they never stopped looking for their kids, and they kept that billboard up until their deaths.
Well, I think it was in 1967 or 1968. There was a letter that arrived that was addressed to Jenny, and it had a postmark from Central City, Kentucky. There was no return address, but it had a photograph inside of a young man in his late 20s with features that resembled that of her son. What was his name? Lou?
Oh, yeah, I got that here, yep.
Who would have been that age during that time if he had survived. Now, on the back of that photo was written, Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie.
Which was one of the older boys.
Right, which was one of the older boys. And it had, I don't understand this part. I love brother Frankie,
It was
little boys, A90132 or 35.
Yeah.
Now, according to some sites, it was said they hired another private detective to go to Central City and look for this person, but he never made contact with them again, and they could never find this detective again. But the photo gave the Sodders more fire for the fuel in believing their children may still be out there and alive. And like you said, George and Jenny searched the rest of their lives for their babies. George even made a statement to a newspaper one time saying that they only wanted to know that if they did die in the fire, they wanted to be convinced. Otherwise, they wanted to know what truly happened to them. And you can't blame him. I mean, this is a parent's worst nightmare.
I mean, you're never going to just give up.
Right, but sadly, George passed away in 1969, never knowing the truth. Jenny and the rest of the kids, except for John, kept seeking answers and for any clues to, their siblings' fate. And Jenny eventually put up a large fence around their property and wore black the rest of her life. And she passed away in, I think it was 1989. And eventually the remaining family took down that billboard. Now, in the older daughter's letter, she even stated that she believed her siblings were kidnapped that night of Christmas Eve. She did fall asleep on the couch while the other children played, and they believed, the family, that the kids were taken before the fire or possibly at the beginning of the fire. No one in the fire, except maybe the oldest son, John, who was away, ever believed they perished in the fire.
Yeah.
Now, a rundown.
Well, I think we'll just do, because I think at this point, we'll just kind of do, like you're saying, just a rundown of everything.
Yeah, let's do a rundown of the
and then we'll just kind of
this
banter.
list. Let's do a quick rundown of this list of strange oddities.
Well, it doesn't have to be quick. We still have an hour, so.
Okay.
We could just do like a rundown of everything that we kind of said, kind of bring it together in one, and then just kind of banter of what our theories are, what the family's theories were, and I don't even know. I mean, it was all just kind of strange to me.
Yeah.
Well,
one, the family noticed a strange man in a car watching the kids for a few days.
Right, when they were going and coming back from school.
Exactly. And, a random stranger told them their house was going to burn after staring at the fuse boxes.
Except for George just had all new electric wire put in when he had the new stove put in, which means the fuse boxes were new too.
Well, exactly. And he didn't really pay attention to this guy. He probably thought, well, the guy wouldn't hire me. He was mad because George didn't give him a job. Some random insurance guy gets into an argument with George and told him his house and his children were going to be destroyed, and that he didn't agree with George's views toward Mussolini. I almost said douchebag.
Well, might as well. That's your theme. Douchebag.
That's right.
Mussolini. So, I don't. It just.
Well, back then, it's the same way today. You can't get into an argument about politics
or religion. Will always
sex,
start
politician,
a war.
sex,
How
religion,
sex come in?
and politics always start an argument.
I've never seen a group of people when someone's, which I don't really see this too much, where a bunch of people are hanging out and they're like, hey, let's talk about sex, and then it starts a war. It's more politics and religion that I see a war coming from. But I see what you're trying
Well,
to hit.
it depends on which end you're on. Never mind. I don't want to go into that.
I don't know.
But I've seen it.
That's for a show I don't even want to know, or really.
Okay.
So, but anyway,
They
but you're right. Politics.
Okay, let's go to politics and religion. If
Yeah.
you want to start an argument, talk about politics and religion. I can just about guarantee you're going to get into an argument because if you don't agree with what the other person is saying.
Well, right, because everybody has their own belief system.
Everybody has their own
And they
belief
don't
system, but there are still people out there that believe that you should think the way they do. And I don't want to get into a discussion about politics.
Well, no, but this is part of the show of what people are saying this was occurring. And
Right.
I agree with Doppel that, just because you install new wiring and everything else, you could have slipped up and didn't put like a proper wire nut connecting the wires properly, whatever else. It could have started a fire, but the fire didn't start in the wiring, and that was actually recanted. So
Right.
that was a falsity told by the fire chief Morris. And but
Okay.
I agree with you. But wait, when you were talking about the insurance guy, here's the thing: is if he was a real insurance guy, he wouldn't be pushing insurance. And then if the guy just said no, I'll turn into a raving lunatic. He would obviously make no business. So it just seems really odd.
Maybe he had a quota.
Well, I guess he was just having a bad day or something.
Maybe
but
he was paid on commission.
But for all of these things they keep lining up, it just seems really weird, To me, it just makes you ponder,
Yeah.
Maybe they're all really odd coincidences, but they all kind of line up to a really bizarre fire,
Right. And then there was that prank call or wrong number right before the fire. What was that, 30 minutes before the fire?
I'm sorry, Rusty said, what about, they were talking about sexy religion or sexy politics, and I think that's, sex and politics is what got a lot of them in trouble in the first place. But yes, they did
Sex and politics ruined a lot of politicians.
Yeah, it's still,
It still does.
Yeah, but yeah, they did have that weird, wrong number. But maybe the lady was partying at a bar and she accidentally misdialed or said the wrong number to the operator, and it crossed wires, and they got a hold of their house. That's a possibility. Or maybe she was meant to make that phone call in order to distract them or to make sure that they were home before the fire was started.
Now, see, that's what I was thinking. Somebody called to make sure they were home. Mm-hmm. And then you had the sounds of these things hitting the roof and rolling off right before, excuse me, right before the fire started.
Yeah, and they found, they had people...
Those hard, round, green things.
But they had people reported seeing fireballs being tossed at the house around that same time. Okay?
Well, didn't somebody in the house, was it Jenny? Wasn't she the one that heard them rolling down the roof? Or was it Marion? No, I think it was Jenny.
It was the mom. It was Jenny. She was, like I said, she just fell back asleep, and all of a sudden she
You
heard
know
this...
what? If something hits my roof and I hear it rolling down, I'm going to get out and look.
Are you sure? It could have been
Sure
a
I
raccoon.
am. I'm going to take my flashlight / taser with me.
You just got that new toy, so that doesn't count.
I know,
so
and
now
I'm
you're
dying
going
to
to be
use it.
listening for any thudding to roll down the roof, so you can
I'm
run
going to
out
walk
with your
around
new...
this house in the dark looking for something to tase.
Yeah, she's got this new flashlight on one side and a super taser on the other, so she's ready to use that thing. Hey, kids.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't stay in bed... Bzz.
I told you, do your homework.
No, you wouldn't do
Go
that.
ahead.
But, no, I agree with you, about her hearing the sounds of hitting the roof. She did listen for a while, but then she didn't hear anything
But
else.
she didn't wake anybody up. I mean,
Well,
that was something strange.
But not really, because you know what? I hear stuff on the roof sometimes. Sometimes the squirrels jump on the roof, run off into a tree and stuff, and you hear things. She probably just thought it was, maybe something fell from a tree. She was listening for anything else beyond that. She didn't, so she fell back asleep,
Okay.
But, you also have, The ladder. The ladder was being taken away from the house, and it was tossed in an embankment 75 feet away when it's always been there on the side of the house. Maybe the guy took that ladder that night, climbed the 14-foot pole, reached over 2 feet, and cut the wires. You know what I mean? Because we were talking about the phone wires were cut too.
Well, he had to get up that pole somehow.
And, yeah, unless he was a lumberjack. But
Yeah, really. Or he was trying out his new spike boots.
exactly.
You ever see that commercial?
I don't know. There's a lot of commercials.
This guy. Oh no, it wasn't a commercial. It was on True TV's Dumbest Criminals. This guy's hanging from a light pole. When the cops ask him what was wrong, he says, or what he was doing up there, he says, I was trying out my new light spike shoes.
Oh, and he didn't know how to get unstuck from the wood.
No, he's up there still in copper. Anybody that climbs an electrical pole deserves to get zapped.
What a dumbass.
I know.
Sorry, what a douchebag.
Yeah.
But also, you know, like we're talking, the phone wires were cut. Why, you know, why were the phone wires cut? You know, they were first told that they were burnt and everything was burnt and that's why they didn't have all this stuff. But the phone or what did I say? Who was the guy who came out there? A line detector?
I just knocked my headphones off. You can trace.
Don't get so excited.
You can trace a wire to the house.
Well,
You
yeah.
can trace an electrical wire to the house. You
Right.
can't tell me that that guy did not know he was cutting the phone wire.
Right. He knew what he was doing.
Of course he did.
He was the same guy that was going and stealing the block and tackle motor hoist thingy out of the garage. And he also stole the taxi. And it also makes you wonder, was he the one who was tampering with the two trucks, too? You know what I'm saying?
I know. He could have been the one throwing the fireballs at the house. But he was out there doing this, you know, cutting the phone wires, stealing this block and tackle and all this other stuff after the fire started. And nobody noticed him because they were so upset over the remaining children that were in the house. They didn't notice what was going on in the garage.
Yeah, don't read chat because it's just going to make you laugh. And we're trying to be serious, guys, because we're doing like a serious show. But yeah, I guess we're not, you know, they just thought it was funny.
Oh, you're telling me that? No, I got to go read chat. Thank you.
Well, they just thought it was funny that we could say douchebag, but then I caught myself from saying dumbass. But I try not to swear or whatever, and even though that's kind of like lower end of swear words or whatever. But you also have the Christmas lights and the house lights. They were still on during the fire, which means there
Well,
was
KC wanted to know if he had a damn cherry picker to get the damn engine block out. Sorry.
And that's exactly how she wrote it too. But I don't know. I didn't say that they took the engine block out of the truck. We don't know. We just said they weren't working.
They took the block and tackle
from the garage
that he used to hoist motors out of vehicles.
But we don't know if the motors were taken out of the truck. Obviously, what they could do is take the spark plugs out. They could cut a wire, you know, to disable stuff or whatever. But, you know, like I was saying, the Christmas lights and the house lights were still on during the fire, which means and points to there was no electrical fire. If there was an electrical fire, you would have absolutely no electricity running.
That's right. It's going to cut your electricity off.
You also have the fire department. It was called at 1 a.m., and they didn't show up until 8 a.m. And you also have the weird phone
And they were
issues.
2.5 miles down the road.
And, yeah. And the guy didn't.
And the fire chief didn't know how to drive the truck with the ladder and the hooks and the hoses and all this other stuff on it. He didn't know, so he's calling people. Hey, do you know how to drive a fire truck? I'm the fire chief. I don't know how.
I wouldn't even care.
That alone is so
you know?
ridiculous, and that right there tells you something. You know, 2.5 miles, run down there and spit on it. It's. You just
What?
I can't believe I said that. You don't take 6-7 hours to go 2.5 miles. I can walk it in less than that.
Get a couple buckets of water. I know, but how? You really? I'm trying to.
If you can't drive the truck, run down there and spit on it.
But listen, no, but here's the thing. How did he become police or not police? Now you got me all
Fire chief.
messed up. How did he become a fire chief if he doesn't even know how to operate the stuff?
He must have been the only one home that night when they were calling for one.
It makes no sense, because in order to be ahead of everybody, you have to have the skills in order to teach everybody on how to use the stuff, you know?
Well, apparently a lot of houses burned down in Fayetteville, West Virginia.
I pray they don't anymore, but the guy's gone. But the fact that he didn't even seem like he knew what he was doing, or obviously he was covering up something, you know, it just seemed very strange to me.
Yeah.
A lot of this just seems strange, you know?
Yeah. And then the family was told that no remains were found, and a week later, George puts 5 feet of dirt over this place to memorialize it, and a mysterious box containing liver was dug up. And he was told it was human flesh by Chief, what's his name, which turned out to be planted by him at a later date.
It just seems weird, too, you know? Him going and getting liver and putting it into a container, which is weird. Why was it in a container? He should have just had it laying in the dirt, okay? You know, why was he planting this evidence? Why was he, it seemed like he was trying to cover up stuff. If there was nothing, if he truly believed, and these kids really did supposedly, I'm not sure if they did, burned in this fire, which was not even hot enough and only burned for 45 minutes because half of the household items were still
And you
there.
know what? 45 minutes is not enough time to cremate a human body. I'm sorry,
you still have some teeth and bones, and household items are still there, whatever. But
yeah,
it just, why was he going so much out of his way to make them stop investigating this stuff? It just seems weird to me. A lot of these things just seem weird, you know, if it's just a natural fire.
And then the coroner declared that all 5 kids were killed by fire, even though no proof was ever found. No proof, no bodies, no nothing. But this insurance guy that told him that his house was going to burn down and his kids were going to die, and he did not agree with what he was saying with Mussolini, happened to be on the coroner's jury.
Yeah. But you're jumping ahead.
Well, maybe so, but
the coroner declared all 5 kids killed by the fire.
Yeah.
And there was no proof to even prove that. One, they had no proof that they were even in the house. They were only going by what the parents said. But there was absolutely no proof to prove that there was any remains of them to prove that they all died in the fire.
Right. And then you had this thief who was caught stealing from them the night of the fire.
During the fire.
Mm-hmm. And this guy was there for a long time. He could have been the one that cut the phone wires. He could have been the one that disabled the trucks.
He did admit to cutting the telephone wire because he said, I thought I was cutting the electricity to the house.
Why would he cut the electricity to the house even?
It doesn't, I know, because he wasn't even going in the house, and everybody had the lights off anyway, supposedly, at that time.
And then he only gets a fine.
Yeah, he basically got a slap on the wrist and said, here's a candy bar and here's some money, go have a beer down there.
Yeah, he slapped on the wrist. Now, don't you do anything like that anymore.
Yeah, don't drink so much next time.
Yeah.
You know, whatever. It didn't make no sense. That strange photo they had sent to them in the mail. Let me pop that back up again.
I tell you what, he was either the person who sabotaged the trucks, threw the ladder, chucked the ladder over in the ditch.
Yeah.
Cut the phone wires, or he was a very smart thief and thinking, well, I can go in here and steal this. They're busy. They're not going to notice me.
That has to be one brave person to. How did he know what was in the garage?
You know what? That has to be a low-life son of a bitch to even steal from somebody when their house is burning down.
Let's not say too many big time swear words because we might get people who are younger aged coming in, and you don't really want to.
I apologize.
I know, but I agree with you. He has to be a pretty low life. But how did he know what they already had in their garage? How did he know that they were going to be sleeping? How did he know any of the things to know to hit this one house up, you know, or whatever? But you also have that strange photo that was sent to them in the mail with the weird description up on the back, and it claiming to be that son And, they were thinking that some of the coding, it kind of, I think it led them to a zip code in Kentucky, but then a lot of people thinking that it was like a telephone number for in Italy or somewhere like that, too, I was reading.
Right. Right. That was, and they never did find out though for sure who sent the photo, and that person never contacted them again. And that was kind of strange that they would even get a photo. Somebody was trying to reach out to them and either got scared or was, well, threatened. That'd be the same thing as being scared, I guess.
Well, you had multiple reports of their children being seen minutes to hours to days after the fire.
Right.
But you have several different people, and they even have reports coming from Mexico and Texas years later, way up in, when the parents were nearing their deathbed and stuff. And, so, and there's a lot of people who swore in affidavits that they saw these children, either while the fire was going on or, like you said, at that hotel and stuff. And it's a small town. And even in one small town, the next small town over, not that far over, you still know other people from the other towns. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
People know each other in small towns. I mean, it's pretty tight-knit, not like cities and suburbia, where there's like plethora of, 100,000 people in one little suburb area. You know what I'm saying?
Really. Did you hear my mother just come in?
No, but...
She came in and told me to calm down. I was getting too loud. So,
see, even she's like, hey, now.
She heard me. Okay, and like I mentioned before, though, you got the same insurance guy who threatened him that was on the coroner's jury.
Yeah, that was really strange.
And it's like I said before, if the house only burned 45 minutes, there is no way it got hot enough to burn the bodies. Plus, several household items remained, even a dictionary.
Yeah, okay, if it was hot enough to make no bodies, why was the dictionary still there intact?
Yeah. I mean, it was slightly burned, but it was still basically intact. Now, if the dictionary is going to survive, I can understand household appliances surviving because back then, what they used, cast iron stoves, you're not going to burn one of them up. I don't care what, you're not going to burn one of them up.
She's like, I must hold my thoughts a little bit. But yeah, no, I agree.
I know.
And we're not laughing because of this story. This is a really serious story. And this is some serious stuff that really happened. And, some people in chat were kind of making us laugh a little bit. And
I apologize.
Sometimes we say things without even thinking and make each other laugh.
I know. Sometimes you never know what's going to come out of my mouth anyway. But
most of the time I can tell. But yeah, I mean.
but it's just that this story is just so. It's intriguing and it's irritating because of all, I mean, this couple lost 5 children and nobody is trying to help them. They're trying to block them. Every turn they make, someone is blocking them or refusing to help them.
Yeah.
And if someone, for argument's sake, kidnapped 5 children, and these children were, taken out
of the
country, why not the youngest?
Because she was sleeping with her parent. Sylvia was 2, because
but one of the kids was 13 years old. Now, if you're going to kidnap that kid and sell him off to another family or take him out of the country, that kid is old enough. He's got memories of his mom and dad.
Yeah, but listen, they may have been threatened. They may have been said, if you don't do this, we're going to kill your family. Or maybe they were told that their family was killed. Maybe the older ones were killed, trying to stop the younger ones from being stolen. We don't really know per se. We're just putting out different theories and thoughts and opinions like everybody else has. Even their own family members have discussed this to some point.
Right.
But, like, they didn't get the 2-year-old because she was up with And Jenny in bed
That's right. She
with
was.
them
She
and
was
George.
sleeping with her
And
parents.
the
Yeah.
17-year-old was already passed out on the bed. But, they had to go out and still put away the chickens and feed the cows. So maybe while they were outside, they could have been taken at that point. And then
That's a good thought, because that's kind of strange though. I mean, it said that 12:30 a.m. they
that's
still had cows to feed. You don't feed cows that
no, that
late.
wasn't at 12 and 12:30. This was like near 10 o'clock.
That's still
Whatever.
kind of late though to be feeding your cattle.
Well, maybe they didn't do it so early because they were celebrating
Oh,
Christmas Eve dinner and
Christmas
stuff.
Eve.
So they put it off a little bit. And she said, "Well, if you guys are gonna stay up, I just want you to make sure you finish doing maybe put the cows away and feed the chickens. I don't know. I may have said it backwards, but they had to do that still, and then to close up the curtains, lock up the house, and go upstairs or whatever, turn off the lights." Well, of course, the oldest one fell asleep. She must have been working during the day or whatever. She just didn't have
Probably
the
what saved
moxie.
her was the fact she slept on the couch.
Well, right, but that's a good way if they went out and then the other younger kids went with them to help so that they could stay up later. Hey, help us, let's get this done quick so we can have the rest of the time to really play. So they could have been outside, and at that time they could have been taken if that's what happened.
Right.
So I could see that being more plausible. But in 1945, I mean, many older children were often used and wanted for labor on farms and also in upper class houses as servants back then.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were taken and sold off, and even to this day people are taken and used for many things. I mean, it's a sad truth, but it does occur every single day. People are
Well,
used
the kids
and
could
sold
have been
off.
told, your parents died in that fire. They could have been threatened, or they could have, your parents don't love you anymore, so they gave you to us. I mean, those are common things that were said back then, and still are.
Yeah. And but I don't know, you have
Well, I'm leaning to, after reading the story and everything, I'm leaning toward the fact that
well,
these
that
children were kidnapped.
taken, yeah. But maybe they were taken by somebody that they kind of knew. Maybe I don't know. There's many things that could, I don't know, kind of.
Fayetteville was a small town back then. I think it still is. I mean, it's not real small, but it's one of those towns where probably everybody knew everybody and knew their
Well,
business.
that's how it is still in small towns. Even
Well,
2 towns away, they still kind of sometimes know your business.
well, they do here.
But
I mean,
that's how it is in almost all small towns. But they also that the fire, like we're talking about, would have to have been incredibly hot for a good period of time in order to completely ash the bones, like you were saying. But there still should have been bone matter ash,
there would have been full skeletons there.
and
That
and it would have been very distinguishable.
right, right.
And they would
would
have been able to
who,
pick
you
the
know,
ash from, because they would have been able to pick bone ash from any other items like wood or fabric or what have you, name it. And even in 1945's investigation type of technology, they still would have been able to determine between all those items being burnt.
Right.
You know?
Right. I mean, that fact doesn't change even through the years. That there is no way that those children could have been cremated in a 45-minute fire and something not being found of them.
Right, and still having all these other items that were still there, and half of them not even burnt.
Right.
And they did have the technology even in 45 to distinguish these certain things. They've had it for a while, actually. You could go back and investigate, how, I don't even, from all the different
I
body.
wonder, though, after all these years,
Mm-hmm.
I wonder why the older children didn't try, after they reached a certain age, did not try to find their parents. Or maybe they were unable to. If they'd been taken out of the country, then they probably were not able to. But it just seems to me that somewhere down the line, because the youngest kid is still alive.
That she was 2. But the thing is, like I said, in 1945 and even years before that and still time after that, a lot of kids, were taken and sold and used on labor farms and used as servants in upper class houses and stuff. So if they've dispersed all over the place, let's just say this is a theory. We don't know this fact.
Yeah,
but
it's just a theory, but if that's what happened, the kids would not be together, so they wouldn't know where each other is.
But if they're out of country, they're out of anywhere where there's no phones, they can't escape. Even if they try to escape, maybe they try to leave, they ended up being killed. Who knows? There's many factors and theories and opinions that you could go with that type of road when we're talking about that. But I agree with you. If they were older, why didn't they try to make contact? Well, maybe they weren't able to make contact. Maybe the older children were killed off. I don't know. Maybe they were taken out overseas, or maybe they were told their whole entire other family members were burnt up in the fire, and that's why they didn't pursue or.
Well, the youngest one, like you said, was 2 years old.
She's still alive today.
She wants to know what happened to her family, if they're alive or dead. And she's been told all her life that, I'm sure,
that her family members were stolen.
That they were taken. And because she probably really doesn't know for sure and maybe doesn't remember too much from that night except for the big fire. Because she was old enough to remember that.
Right. We really did try our best to go beyond of what everything that everybody kept regurgitating about this and the story. And of course we mentioned the story in the beginning because for those of you who never heard it need to know what happened that night. And then, that we did discover a letter written by the 17-year-old who was sleeping on the couch, and she wrote down, and she goes in more detail than what we even mentioned, and we're going to have the link in our references in our YouTube description so you guys can go and read her letter and see far more than what we were mentioning and the hassles that they were going through and everything else. There's just so much that's just like, what? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why were they doing this? Why did it take them so long? Why was the police, I always want to call it the police, I apologize, the chief of fire department, whatever the frick his name is, Morris, he was just making every effort to throw them off and to close the case down, or even from, just not knowing how to drive the truck, claiming that it was a wire fire, even though we know it wasn't, because all the lights were still on. I mean, I even read that some of the older, what the heck was the name of the town again?
Fayetteville.
Residents, some of the older residents, and some of the Sodders themselves, they believe that the Sicilian mafia was trying to extort money from George Sodder, and that they took his children, or people who knew of this plan took the children to spare their lives from being burned alive, and possibly were taken back to Italy or sent them off to be servants in other households. Now, this is what many of the residents were talking about, as well as the Sodder family, and you had mentioned that they had moved into a small community that was of Italian immigrants. So,
right.
And they had very strong beliefs and connections with, the mob, and they were for Mussolini and all these different people there. So, and George, we don't really know a whole lot of his background, but it seems very suspicious how he even just came here and then was ditched by the rest of his brother, and he went back.
Right.
Did he do something over there, which,
And they had to get him out of the country, or what?
Exactly. It makes you. Why did he never ever want to talk about his past?
I know this could have been a vendetta against his family or against him
in the first
from
place.
something that happened, back in his home country.
And what did he may have had ties with, or his family or connections with, and what they did, and then did he continue on his behavior over here, and and these people believe this who lived in the town as well.
And that theory is very plausible, just for the simple fact that he basically was ditched by his family. His brother escorted him, accompanied him all the way to Ellis Island, and then turned around and got on another ship and went back to his country.
Right.
It was just like, and George was only 13 years old at the time. But what can a 13-year-old kid do that they have to get him out of the country.
But back then, when you were 13, you weren't looked at how you're looked at now as 13. You were treated as adults a lot back then, children were, because you had to grow up fast and work. You didn't really go to school. You had, you were really starting to work when you were like 5, 6, 7, helping out families if you had a farm or what have you. Times were different back then.
Well, George had some intelligence because he ended up owning his own trucking company.
Well,
and
right.
apparently with all the money he spent trying to, paying off all the detectives, $15,000, offering a $5,000 reward for information on his children, that's a lot of money back then.
Right. But this is just people's banter going around in town and stuff. This is not what we're saying, like this is factual, whatever. But we're presenting everything that's been talked about and spoken about even by family members or the residents in the town, and just all the different things that weren't adding up on reports, to everybody else saying, hey, I saw this, or whatever. You know what I mean? Nobody really knows what really happened to them, but it seems to point that they survived because they weren't found in the fire,
right?
And they either, I think that if they children
and why did they only take 5? Why didn't they take the rest of them? Okay,
because they were adults upstairs. I mean, good luck trying to steal an adult. They'll fight you off. But like I said, maybe these kids were outside and being picked off that way, or they knew who was coming and said, hey,
I don't think they went into my personal opinion is, after reading all of this, I don't think they went in the house and got those kids. I think they caught those kids outside because those kids were outside late that night. And it probably was because it was Christmas Eve. They did celebrate on Christmas Eve, so they were out at night doing their chores then.
But that would explain why the lights were still on, why the curtains were open, and why the doors were unlocked and open.
Right, because the kids
were still out there working. They just didn't.
They were taken outside. They didn't make it back into the house to do all of these routine things that they did every night.
But listen, that other guy was out there at the same time before the fire, trying to cut the wires and steal the stuff with a stolen taxi and everything else. Maybe he wasn't alone. And why did he just get a slap on the wrist and was sent away? But obviously he must have had other people with him.
He could not have been alone.
He
could not have been alone. He was probably mostly out there for the after effects. Starting the fire, cutting the phone lines,
or maybe he was a part
disabling the trucks.
But maybe he was meant to be the patsy to throw them off. But, he cut the phone line on purpose because he was hoping that they'd all burn up in the fire. They all were probably hoping they would burn up in the fire. And they probably thought, well, we'll just sell off the kids or do whatever. Who really knows? I mean, there's so many theories and thoughts or opinions. But, I mean, there's only so much evidence or reports or things that we could find and research and share with you guys. But I don't know. I don't think this is ever really going to be solved. But it's one of the most strange and mysterious cold cases that I've come across, and I really don't believe that they burned up in the fire. And I think that the reason why they never did make contact back with the family is because they believed that the family would be harmed, or they were threatened, or they were in a place where they could not make contact.
Or they honestly believed the family was dead.
Right, or some of them, the older ones, might have been killed. But that one photo, it does kind of look similar to the younger one, but, we all have twins, at some point, but I don't know. I think all of this was extremely fascinating. I think it was really sad what the family had to go through from the beginning to the end. It was horrible.
Poor George and Jenny. I mean, they never gave up. Even, right, they looked for their kids, and like you said, they left the billboard up right up to their deaths.
Mm-hmm. I think they left it up for a little bit after that until the older kids, most of the older kids were going and stuff. Yeah. So, but I mean, like we said, we don't even know what George's background is or why he came here and then his family left him, and we don't really know. There's some things that are missing and why he was so. I
wonder if Jenny even knew about his background.
Right, he was so adamant about not talking about things, but maybe. And I'm not saying this family were bad people. I'm not saying they did bad things. we're just questioning things because things seem odd from the beginning to the end. And I'm not saying that the family did this, but obviously there was a lot of people involved in the town who knew about this, even as
That's
high up
what
to the
gets
fire
me.
chief. And that's why maybe why they took from 1 a.m. to 8 a.m. to get there, and then said, let's not dig so much. We're going to take a break and go hang out with our family for Christmas. Even that's weird, you know?
I know that kind of got me too, because nobody in the town would help them, not the police, not anybody. And they wouldn't let the FBI in. Even the state police said their hands were tied. Even the governor of the state at the time couldn't get anything done. It just seems to me that entire town had to be in on it.
Not the entire town. That's not true. That's kind of that's a little, not the entire town, but there's maybe a few of the men or a few of the people.
The fire chief, the coroner.
Yes, the insurance guy.
Insurance guy.
But now, I'm not saying the entire town, but there was a few people who maybe they were a part of some type of...
Yeah, but there were a few key people that were in on that, and they had to be. A part of certain
things, and that's why they could say, hey, FBI people, we don't need your help.
Even the law in that town wouldn't let the FBI come in.
I don't know. There's just so many things that seem strange. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I don't know. Why don't we end a little bit early, and then you let everybody know what we're going to do, next week or whatever.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming in and listening to us. I want to thank our mods for doing a good job, and I want to thank Raven for a good show. Join us Tuesday, January 19th, when we will discuss the mysterious disappearances in national state parks, the missing 411.
Right. We've been wanting to do that show for a while, and it was actually a viewer's request.
But it was also on our list almost 2 years ago when we
first started
when
our show.
Yeah, when we were trying to come up with subjects for our shows.
Well, we have so many subjects that and we've had them written up for a long time, so we'll never run out of ideas. Plus, we're always having people give us suggestions, and we do most all of the suggestions that people send us. So if you have a show idea or whatever, please message us, and
we do check into them, and we're a little backlogged on them, but we do read your messages, and we do check in, research the subject that you're requesting, and we will get to them as soon as we can.
Right. I just want to say thanks everybody for coming. Thanks for sharing us with others. Thanks for subscribing us and giving us a like, and we'll see you next week.
And don't forget to share us on Facebook or any other social media you happen to be a member of. And good night, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Night.